is creator at Imaginosity in the Learning Lab. What a fab title. Scott's provided consultancy services for literally hundreds of different organisations through his business, the Learning Lab, and Scott actually also delivers work with CIPD and has been over the past few years. I've known Scott for a few years now. I think he has a very unique way of taking really complex strategies and theories and making things very practical, memorable, and very creative and innovative approach to what he does. And I'm sure he'll have an engaging, fun and practical session for us today. I hope so. It's over lunchtime. There's a lot of you on the call today, so Scott will try and make it as, it might not be as interactive as it might normally be, Scott, I'm sure, but I'm sure the session will be very engaging. So I'd just like to pass you over now to Scott, who will maybe introduce himself a wee bit more and take us through the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you very much for having me. Yeah, I'm going to keep it high in the interactive rate, actually. I'm going to ask yourself to arm yourself with a pen and a piece of paper that you can doodle on and write some notes on as we go through, because I will be getting you really involved. As much as we can communicate with each other via audio or via video screen, there's lots I can ask you to do that I'm sure will really engage you and give you a good chance to think about how you can apply some of these positivity principles back to your job role. There's a big part of my job role really involves positivity, because I don't always just do facilitative programs. I also create and ghostwrite contents for organizations, and I really try to embed as much of that positive psychology in the stuff that I do where possible, because I think if we can really focus on people's kind of abundance and where they can flourish rather than the deficit of what's broken in people, it can really be of big benefit. So I've put a little quotation up for you to start off a little short session today by Martin Seligman and Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, which is all around positive psychology and what it's actually really all about. It's not just fixing the stuff that's broken, it's about nurturing people, about helping them to really be at their very best. There's a lot of classic principles that you've probably found in performance management that are about what we classify as deficit. It's about getting people to sort out the stuff that's wrong with them and trying to fix that stuff that's broken. Whereas positive psychology is all about trying to discover what's right with people, how we can help people to blossom, and how we can enable people really to bloom, how we can find what's the best in people and make it even better. So the history and origins of that has its roots very much in Buddhism and ancient Greek. And it's really about trying to find the best in others. Now, I experienced this during the period of lockdown for myself, you know, in terms of my working and practice as well, because as Lee very aptly described me as being really creative, I'm quite a kind of sunshine and stars kind of guy. I'm very optimistic. I'm very positive, but like probably many of you on the call today, I found the early days of lockdown quite a tricky experience for me to get my head around everything. And I'm also the kind of person that if I was giving it as a kind of narrative, I'm the kind of person that could be carrying down the road but pull a wheelie and just jump over the nearest bump. And I found actually the whole Corona thing a bit of a roller coaster. And somebody called it to me a few weeks ago, the Corona coaster. And I had to do something to try and reawaken myself. So what I did was I focused on my strengths. I focused on the stuff that I can do incredibly well to try to move that forward. So I wanted to share some of those lessons with you today to give you a chance to kind of reawaken your own little sleeping warrior moments, to give you the best chance to manage as you move through into the next phase of transition, whatever that might be like for you. So I'm going to start off with a little question for you I'd like you to answer for me. And the question is this: is this glass half full or half empty? So I'm going to give you a little poll on screen just now. If you could just click your answer for me, and we'll see what answer we give to this question. Brilliant. All quick. You can tell there's good learner focused on this session. You all answer within 0.5 seconds. It normally takes people about half a minute to answer all of these. Right, brilliant. Okay, so I'm just going to end the poll and show you the results. So there we go. We've got 86% of people believe it's half full and only 14% believe it's half empty. That's a massive, big proportion. There's a difference in how you answer that question depending on what frame of mind that you're actually in. So if you answer the question from the perspective of the glass being half full, what it means from a psychological point of view is you've answered that question from the gain frame. If you've answered the question where it's half empty, you've answered it potentially from a frame of loss. You're starting in the loss frame rather than starting in that gain frame. So if I talk to you about those early days of lockdown, or those early days of trying to, you know, work through all these huge changes that are happening in the world, every day that we get up, if we approach that starting point of a day through a frame of gain, we've got a far better opportunity to tackle any challenges that come our way. If we start our days through that frame of loss, it becomes a really difficult space to exist within. And what psychology tells us, it's actually quite difficult to get people to switch from loss to gain. It's very difficult to do that flip, to move through that. Once we're in the loss frame, it becomes quite difficult to move into that space of gain. So if we can start, for example, with 3 positive things every day to have our movements forward, it means that we're in a far better space to do things differently. So I'm going to share a little video with you to show you an example of this in a bit more of an expansive manner. Alison Ledgerwood is a psychologist and social scientist, and she specialises in a lot of studies and research around these principles of gain and loss. You can see I drew myself on my little board here in my yellow shirt, traveling through my week, hoping to try to stay in that game frame. But Alison did some really fascinating little pieces of research. So I'm going to play a little video for you, and you can hear Alison's take on this.
Could it be that it's actually mentally harder for people to convert from losses to gains than it is for them to go from gains to losses? So we conducted a third study to test how easily people could convert from one frame to another. This time, we told participants, imagine there's been an outbreak of an unusual disease and 600 lives are at stake. And we asked participants in one group, if 100 lives are saved, how many will be lost? And we asked participants in the other group, if 100 lives are lost, how many will be saved? So everyone just has to calculate 600 minus 100 and come up with the answer of 500. But whereas people in one group have to convert from gains to losses in order to do that, people in the second group have to convert from losses to gains. We timed how long it took them to solve this simple math problem. And what we found was that when people had to convert from gains to losses, they could solve the problem quite quickly. It took them about 7 seconds on average. But when they had to convert from losses to gains, well, now it took them far longer, almost 11 seconds. So this suggests that once we think about something as a loss, that way of thinking about it tends to stick in our heads and to resist our attempts to change it. What I take away from this research and from related research is that our view of the world has a fundamental tendency to tilt toward the negative. It's pretty easy to go from good to bad, but far harder to shift from bad to good. We literally have to work harder to see the upside of things.
So there's a far longer version of Alison's full TED Talk, and I've put it on a link in the final slide that I'm going to share with you today, so you can go and have a little watch at that. That last statement she said is that fundamentally we have a view of the world that almost always starts with a negative rather than starts with a positive. You have to think about what's broadcasted through our TV screens and through our media every single day around news stories, that they always start with the bad stuff and then move on to the light-hearted stories towards the end of the news. We've been almost conditioned to be in that space of negative as a starting point and trying to fix that stuff that's broken and not working. You imagine for a moment that you had to go for surgery and you were told that the surgeon had a 30% failure rate. By comparison to going for that surgery and telling you that the surgeon had a 70% success rate, straight away you would have higher trust if the gain frame was entered into your psychology quicker than what the loss frame was. So I drew this little illustration before I started the session today to say this is me traveling across my working week, and I have some really positive reinforcement from somebody who sends me a message to say they love a piece of work that I did. Straight away that I'm in the game frame, I start to think about the stuff that I've got ahead, and I think about the conversations that I'm going to have with people about how I'm going to bring the best out in people with the work that I'm doing, how I'm hosting this course today, and I'm going to try to get people in that space of positivity. I'm in that game frame straight away. So no matter what happens to me after that point in time, I'm in a space of gain rather than a space of loss. Even when somebody throws a challenge to me around things that aren't working particularly well, there's technology hitches and things, I start to think about what can I do about it rather than what's broken in it. I don't allow it to enter my frame of loss to say, well, it's really bad and it's awful and it doesn't work. I push it into that frame of game to say, what could I do? How can I help it to work better? How can I use my strengths to help to solve that situation? And by doing that, really what I'm doing in every single one of those circumstances is I'm using one of these different positivity principles to try to bring that to life. Now, what we're going to do in a little short session today is I'm going to bring all these little principles to life through a series of little short activities for you, so you can try some of these things while we're on the webinar today in your own space, in your own home, and then beyond the session today, you can go and try them across the course of the rest of your working week, and maybe even deploy some of them into your weekend practice as well, depending on what you happen to be up to this weekend, because you can apply these to personal situations as well as to work ones. So the first thing that I'm going to show you there on screen is around abundance. Abundance is about a lens by which we can be in a space of flourishing. You will find that abundance professionally often exists within coaching conversations that you have with someone. If you imagine you sat down with someone and you had a coaching dialogue around what their goal is and their ambitions are and where they want to move towards, in that space, you're probably inviting people to get into that area of abundance. You're kind of viewing people as being creative. And if we can view the relationships around us as equally being creative, and we can view ourselves as being creative, what a starting point is for abundance is we start to focus on, how can I be at my very best? How can I meet my desired outcomes? What can I do to move forward towards solving this challenge? Then we have things like positive deviance. Positive deviance is that second part that I mentioned at the end of that sentence. It's moving towards things rather than moving away from things. How can I be at my very best today? How can I move towards my goals? If I get stuck in a rut with something and I can't quite solve it, what can I do that would help it to move forward to a different position? You know, second week of lockdown, I had a product that you can see behind me that I was working on, and I got stuck. I went, how can I use this? Because I'm no longer in an office space. I can't give people these products. I can't have people meet to do them. But I started to think, well, actually, can I do these more virtually? Can I produce them in a digital form? Could I do things that would actually enable me to have better conversations with people remotely? Could we use Zoom or Teams or Google Hangouts to actually have better conversation with all the different stakeholders? And the answer I got to that was yes. But I only got that answer because I was using positive deviance. The third thing that I then did was start to think about flourishing versus languishing, because both of these things need to be addressed, but they need to be addressed holistically and understand both of them. Because if flourishing is about growth and it's about resilience and it's about creative thought, then languishing is about my emotional impairments. It's about the emotional distress and those impairments that are stopping me moving towards things. And I can't address how I want to flourish unless I can understand what's stopping me, and I can recognize more what's stopping me, and a better conversation with those around me about what's stopping me from achieving things and how I can move forward more into those spaces. I then start to think about things like happiness and well-being, and that's kind of characterized in two different spaces. You probably have things like subjective well-being, where you've got your kind of life satisfaction and your domestic experience, and that's been massively altered for us all over the course of the last 10 to 13 weeks around what our own domestic life experiences are. But what can I do to make that life experience far more enjoyable and fruitful for you as well? I know my youngest son is 9 years old. We do a daily music walk now. He wants to go walk down to the front of Avere Beach and talk about nothing but music for an hour in his walk with his daddy. And he wants to do that because he enjoys it. But I want to do it not just to spend time with my son, but because it improves my happiness and well-being by spending time on something that is really important to him and important to me also. And then the second part of that, which is about the psychological connected parts of happiness and well-being, and that's more about the relationships that you have and the personal development you put in. So how have you helped yourself to grow over the periods of change and over the periods where you found things tough? What have you done to expand your knowledge? What have you done to expand your relationships? How have you reconnected with those different relationships? And I've heard so many stories from people where they've actually had more meaningful conversations on a virtual platform than what they've had face-to-face with people. And they've done that because they're focusing on happiness and well-being to try and give themselves that psychological support. And then the last thing is about virtues and strengths. There's an American author by the name of Shaw Anker who tells us that the brain loves progress. It loves moving things forwards, but it loves using the things that you're really talented at to help you to solve the things that you're not. So how can you redeploy your strengths into areas of stress? How can you take the stuff that you're really talented at and push it into other areas? So if you're really organized at work, you're really analytical, how can you push that analytical strength into areas of stress? How can you use some of those things? And again, trying to deploy the things that you do well into areas that you're maybe finding a little more difficult becomes a really positive principle to do. So I'm going to try this through a series of little short activities today to give you an opportunity to try some of these things out. Now, I'm not sure how wise it is to try and coach 36 people via a video screen, but I'm going to give it a little go this afternoon to try this out. One of those ways that you can do that is thinking about the conversations that you have in your own headspace, or the conversations that you have with other people. Is if you're helping them to move forward to meet their desires or where they want to get to, it can be a really productive experience for you, because you're building, you know, a better quality of output in what you're doing, but you're also building a stronger social contract with other people and helping to support them as well. As Robert Ingersoll famously said, we rise by lifting others. So if you can lift others by helping and supporting others, it actually provides you with some benefit. So what we're focusing on here is, how can you use your strengths to help you? And how can you use your strengths to help other people? How can you be in that better space of happiness and well-being? So if you've came across appreciative inquiry before, as I'm sure some of you have, it goes in a staircase model from bottom to top in terms of the kind of questions and frameworks that you ask. Starting with the discovery step, but what we're doing there is trying to mobilize someone to really try to discover, you know, what being at your very best actually looks like and feels like and senses like and sounds like to you. Then we move on to the phases of dream, where we create a vision of where we want to get to our desired position. This is classically used in every single Disney movie, by the way, where you actually start off the dream and then you make that dream become a reality, and then you try to do things with it to put it into practice. And then we have the design phase, which is about trying to deploy some of those areas, and less destiny about how you're going to do that. So I'm going to just get you to have a little bit of reflective time for me for a few minutes, where I want you to take the notes on some of the questions that I'm going to ask you here, to see what your answers are to some of these questions that I'd like to put your way. So we're going to start with the discovery phase, which is all about, you know, really identifying and appreciating the kind of core positives of the things that you want to try to discover. So the question I want to ask you is, where are you really strong? What are you really talented at? What is your superpower? If you had to describe it, write that down on a sheet of paper for me. What's your strongest characteristic, the thing that you know outweighs everything else, that you're really, really talented at? When you're at your best, what are those things that you're doing incredibly well? Okay, so if you've written that down, I want you now to think about the dream, imagining what that could be. How could you utilize those strengths better? What would your best be like? What would you be doing? How do you picture yourself using them? How could you see yourself living them? What could you be doing that would actually make those things work incredibly well for you? How could you use them to help and to support others? How could you use them to help and support yourself? Then thirdly, from a design point of view, how could you build those ideas and visions and to make them achieve your greatest potential? How could you put those into practice to assist you? How could you move that one step closer to doing that? What things would you actually be doing? Are there any people that you need to speak to assist you? And then last question is on destiny, and this is all about implementing or delivering your proposed dream. How will you do that? How else could you deploy them? How can you broaden your knowledge of that? So if that's really strong for you at the moment, how could you get even better at it? How could you master it even further? What kind of things could you be doing? Now, all of those questions that I've just asked you are about you trying to recognize what you've got as a real strength and how you can deploy that. It's probably worth commenting to you, it's worth considering what you believe is an actual strength. So for me, a strength isn't just something that you're really good at, but it's also something you really enjoy doing. So I know, for example, that I'm quite innovative in the way that I work sometimes when I create programs for companies. I also really enjoy doing that. I also know that I'm really good at writing proposal documents, but would I want to be doing that on a Friday evening? Nah. So have a think about not just what's strong, but what's in flow. You know, what's the areas where you're in that best space where you actually really enjoy it? You could spend hours doing it because you're having so much fun doing it and you're enjoying it so much. That's where a true strength really exists. It's the areas where you can actually take those things and utilize them. And the great things about those strengths is you can redeploy them into areas of stress. So I mentioned to you already, week 3 of lockdown, I had just developed a new program. I'd also started a whole series of work, and every bit of that work got postponed. I then started to think, well, what can I do about this? How can I do it? Well, I know that I can recalibrate my thoughts quite well because that's a strength that I've got. I know I can think differently about the challenges that are in front of me. I know that I'm pretty strategic in the way that I work, so I can look at what patterns exist. And I sat down with 2 or 3 friends and we started to look at the marketplace that was out there, the clients that were out there, and started to say, well, what can we do to help and to support them? And we decided to do some quite different things over the space of those kind of 8 weeks in lockdown. And one of those was to start another business in the middle of it and to try to think about how could we help to solve people's problems by trying to use each of our strengths to help to solve others. And the whole intention of doing that was try to be positive. Was try to use the positive intention of how could we help rather than the stresses of what's challenging us. Not to ignore the things that are challenging us because they were part of the fuel that actually helped us to move forward and to do things different, but was to use our collective strengths to help to solve some of those things. So collectively, I know that I then partnered with somebody who was a brilliant writer. Collectively, I know I would then partner with somebody who was a great designer. Collectively, I know I'd partner with somebody who was really analytical, and actually building those strengths together to make a sizable difference to how you solve your workplace challenges. Again, you will have had this out in different marketplaces. You'll have people within your own experiences, either yourself personally or people you've worked with who have been furloughed during this time as well. And they're trying to work on how do they get into that space of being at their very best within it. What can you do in that space to use your strengths to help you to navigate through some of those tricky times? You know, how can you have more positive deviance of moving towards the things that are actually really going to help you? So that's a little bit of a summary on appreciative coaching. You can use that on a one-on-one basis with people. As I said, you can use it for yourself to really try to plot down the areas of strength. There's a brilliant author by the name of Marcus Buckingham. If you've never heard of Marcus before, I'd ask you to go and seek Marcus and his work out. He's got some brilliant content around strengths and how you can use them. So I'd really urge you to go and look at some of Marcus's work because he's got some great insight there. The second area I'd like to talk to you about today is around the importance of play. And this is other characteristics of positive principles that we're talking about here around the abundance and flourishing and positive deviance. This lovely quote by Maya Angelou always really sings to me, is you can't use up creativity. The more you use, the more you have it. And the more that you get into that space of trying to do different things in different ways. So I wanted to show you a little illustration here to kick this off. This is a drawing by a 9-year-old child who was given a competition to draw a post office of the future. Okay, if I tell you that drawing was sketched out in 1983 by this 9-year-old child here that you can see on screen, don't ask me why I've kept a drawing. That's just another story completely. But I was up at my mum's house last year, and she kept all my drawings from art class at school, and there was really strange things like alien rock bands and all these really weird things. But anyway, I came across this little drawing of this post office, and I remember so clearly what the competition was. It was a local competition that was run to draw a post office of the future. Now, if I asked you as a grown adult to go and draw a post office of the future, I suspect that what many of us would do is we'd draw that post office 10 years down the line at the very most. We'd start to draw maybe, remote screens. We'd probably be affected by a recency of what happened in terms of what we'd do as well. We'd all those circumstances. You ask a 9-year-old to do that and they'll draw a planet. they'll draw it beyond Earth. They'll draw it bigger than Earth because it can do everything. They probably would draw, which I can remember, it's in this picture that's cut off, about 10 other retailers on a street of planets and how they do things. Because what they're doing as children is, in their formative years, their judgment is not clouded by reality. It's focused on possibility of what could they do differently in order to make that world a better place. They don't have those kind of things infringing their ability to think differently. So in positive deviance, when we move towards things in abundance, what we try to do is build it around the frame of possibility, the what ifs, the what might, the how could we. So I'm going to give you your own little challenge that I'd like you to have a go at tackling. This is the Robertson's pool problem. It's quite a classic test that we do with people to see where their mental age is at when they try to problem solve as well. It's a rather suspect picture, as I appreciate, than what you can see on screen. I think Mr. Robertson's currently doing time for some form of crime, but anyway, that's another story. But the Robertson's pool problem is this, is I'd like you to draw that on a piece of paper for me. So the blue shape in the centre, as I've drawn on my board behind me here, is just your swimming pool. And it's surrounded by 4 trees either side of the pool. Okay, I'll give you a minute just to draw that down. And the Robertsons have decided that they want to double the size of the swimming pool, but they want to ensure that the swimming pool is still square and it stays in the same position. And the kids are insisting they don't move the trees. The trees have got to stay in the same location. Okay, I would like you to try to redraw that to see how you do it. So it has to be double the size, still square, in the same position, and you can't move the trees. Let's see what you come up with. Now, when I do this little test with groups, and bear in mind, I've done this with engineers, I've done it with pharmacists, I've done it with teachers, I've done it with a whole lot of people, and the answer they give me is almost really interesting in terms of how their brain starts to think around problems. And will they think of the solution like an adult, or will they think of the solution like a child? Will they go into that frame of possibility, or will they do it with the frame of reality? So I'm going to use my board here to maybe describe some of the different ways by which you might have solved this problem, and we'll see if these mirror up to what you've done. So somebody might have said that what we're actually going to do is make the pool deeper. So we're going to double the depth. That's quite a common answer that people give you. That's also quite a logical approach to doing things, because it looks at the kind of engineering focused of size and depth and ratio about how you could do that. So I would still suspect that's quite an adult response to doing it. If alternatively you've said that we're going to create islands for the swimming pool and actually just make it twice the size, then that's kind of quite a childlike approach to things. I would maybe suspect you're about 14 in your head if that's the case of what you're doing. If you start to go beyond that and you start to build like swimming flumes and slides into it, and you start to have all sorts of things like floating bars in it and all these sorts of things, and you know, you have a layer of swimming pool, so you maybe have it on 3 or 4 layers, then you're at the 9-year-old. Then you're in that space that you really start to think like the child in you as well. If finally you've just done this, you've put a line round here like this, a thick space, that's very much the adult's engineering answer of how to solve that problem. That is classically how engineers solve that issue. They simply turn the pool on its side and they draw it at that angle as well. That's a very logical way of solving it. So I can't see everyone's camera on today, but obviously I'm imagining there's some noddy heads going on right now going, yes, I'm thinking like an adult. So I'm going to give you the opportunity to try to resolve that and to try to give you 5 minutes of space for you to get into that space of possibility. There's a little exercise I do for myself all the time, and I do it with groups when I work with them, is I try to get them into that space of breaking their patterns of logic into a space of possibility. And I use a little questioning framework to really help people to do it. So I'm going to introduce it to you. I'd love to have you have a go at doing this. It's by a wonderful little company from Sheffield called Go Mad. Go Mad stands for Go Make a Difference. In GoMad, use this little questioning framework. I'm not going to get into the framework in full detail, but I'll just give you this one little example. If you ask somebody the question, how might you possibly do something versus how will you do something? If you ask the how will you do something, you'll generally get one answer to it. If I ask how might you possibly do it, you'll get 5 or 6 or 7 answers. So it's built around the framework of possibility. So what I would like you to do is I'd like you to write down a challenge or a problem that you'd like to solve. It could be something work related, it can be something personal. I just want you to write down maybe just a sentence or two on a challenge that you would like to solve. If you do that for me, first of all. And I'll go with Lee and Suzanne watching them when they write down as a timing for this, because I can see that their heads are lifting up and they've done that part of it. So when you've written down that challenge, what I'd then like you to do is I'd like you to write numbers 1 to 10 down that sheet of paper. Now I'm also going to make a presumption here that you're all writing it down the left-hand column. Yep, that's a logical way to do it. So another way to do it would be to write them down like 10 little mind maps all over the paper, and then you can write down them in a random free-form manner. So imagine you had a number 1 here, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, etc. like this. And the reason you want to do it that way is if you want to be free-form in your thinking, you can jump from one to another rather than doing them in a logical order. Because if you do them in a logical order, you'll probably start at number 1 and work your way down the questions. If you do it in a free-form manner, your brain can jump from one statement to another, not focusing on any particular one being more important than the other. Your challenge is this: you're going to try to answer those 10 questions as many times as you can in 5 minutes to see how many answers that you can actually come up with. Okay? So that means if you answer question 1 4 times, you've got 4 points. If you answer question number 2 twice, you've then got 6 points. Okay, so you're trying to get as many points as you can over a 5-minute time window to see how many answers that you can get. Before you start that, I'd like you to write a target down in the top right-hand corner of your piece of paper. That's the goal. That's how many actions and ideas you're going to try and come up with by the end of the 5 minutes. Okay, I want you to try to blow that target out of the water. Not when you get to 24 and you're about to get to 25 and you've got a minute left, you go, and finish and have my cup of tea and relax. I want you to keep going and really push it fast and try to get through as many as you can in that 5-minute time period. If you do that, you'll push your numbers really, really high. And I'm not going to put any restriction on how many ideas that you come up with, but I will tell you this one thing. I saw somebody once get 94 ideas in 5 minutes to problem solving by using this as a method. Now that is incredibly hard to get to those kind of numbers. But I just want you to think about that. It's how fast can you make your brain work? You're not looking for realities here. You're looking for possibilities. So I'm going to put my microphone on mute. We're going to do this just in the interest of time because we have got quite a lot of things to tackle today. I'm going to give you 4 minutes at it rather than the full 5 minutes on it today in this session, and you can do it on your own beyond this for 5 minutes on your own. So I'm going to put myself on mute for 4 minutes, and I'll sound a little alarm when your time's up as well. This is your brain talking. You can go faster. Keep going. You've 50 seconds left, folks. Okay, folks, if you want to count up all your ideas and give yourself a total mark, so 1 point for every single thing you come up with. And then when you've done that, maybe just in the chat window, if you can access it, put your total number in there. Let's just see anyone who's got some interesting numbers that they don't mind sharing. Only if you want to, obviously. If you don't want to do that, there's no obligation for you. But if you wish to stick your numbers in the chat window, how many you come up with? 34, wonderful. 35, 35, 25. They're all really good numbers. Well done, folks. That's great. So as you start to see those numbers come through that you can see on the chat window as they come up, you probably then start to look at all those ideas and say, well, they're all possibilities. They're not the realities of the kind of things I would do. You can then start to build another little layer of psychology in here. You can look at Edward de Bono's work around different colours of thought in terms of how you do things. He looks at framing your thought around colour psychology as well. So when we talk about plus, if we look at those ideas as a plus, as something that's really useful and something really good that we could do something with, that's a kind of yellow mark, a P. So if you've got great ideas, put a P next to them. If you've got minus ideas and stuff that's not working, you put an M next to them, things that are maybe just a bit too radical. And if you've got other ideas, you've got an I next to them for interesting. Sometimes the most interesting ideas with a bit of discussion and debate become something quite fruitful. So de Bono uses PMI as a way of framing that, which is about plus yellow, minus on black, and interesting is red, because that's about emotion and darkness in terms of those two other different colours that are in there as well. Some brilliant numbers on there is what you've all done. So yeah, it's important to try and have that playful thought in your head of what you do around things, and just keep thinking like this. The reason I know I'm in a space of being really creative when I try to solve things is I really believe this quote is the fundamental root of it, is the creative adult is the child who survived, is you really embrace your goofdom. Be a bit silly sometimes, because if you do that, you'll get better solutions to things. Now, this is my own current little 9-year-old that I said I did the musical walks with every single night. And I asked him a question 12 months ago. If you could give leaders and managers and organizations one piece of advice to tell them something, what would you ask them? And I was doing this because I was producing a little card game around positive psychology, and I wanted to record all different people sharing stories around positivity and the things they could do. And I'll tell you a little more about that just at the very end. But this was Brodie's response to that question. If there was one thing, if there's one thing he could tell me, what would that be?
Hi, I'm Brodie. If there's one thing I could tell you, it would be respect dragons. If you don't like dragons, you're not a human. Bye.
There you go. So that's his piece of advice to the world. So that tells you how 9-year-olds maybe think about things in maybe different ways than what our logical adults might do as well. So last couple of things that I wanted to share with you today in the webinar is, one of those is around inner dialogues. And this is about understanding that holistic view of understanding where we're languishing so we can indeed flourish. So I think sometimes we hear little language patterns in our head. We hear those phrases to ourselves before we do something. So, and do you remember the days you used to be able to do presentations in front of people in rooms? Do you remember those really heady days many months ago? In some of those moments, sometimes people get those anxiety moments where they get that little language to say, I'm going to say the wrong thing, or I'm going to look daft, or I'm going to say the wrong thing. That's a little inner mental chatter that goes on in their heads. The great thing about that inner mental chatter is it's really amplified, and we can talk to it, we can do things with it, we can hear it, but we can also pause. We can take a think and say, well, what can we do about that? We can take those moments of reflection. And I think it's good to classify these into 3 separate camps and those little inner language patterns that you hear in your head. You've got things that make you sad, you've got things that make you glad, and you've got things that make you mad. They're the kind of language patterns that we classically get in our heads all the time. So I'm going to ask you to pick one of those 3 things, and I just want you to write down in your piece of paper that you've been putting all your notes down on. What's happened to you in the last couple of weeks? A situation that you've been in, that you've experienced, that you've observed, where you've heard that little inner chatter in your head that's made you sad, glad, or mad. Just write it down for me. Write it down on that piece of paper. What was the situation? What were you experiencing? What was the language, if you can even get to that, that was being said to you? Now, I suspect what you've written down that piece of paper is one of 2 things. You've probably either written down the situation in terms of what happened, or you've maybe written down what you said or what you did in that situation. If you've written one or both of those things down, then what you've probably just done in your brain is a little bit of single loop learning. You've basically written down the behavior that you observed or the behavior you demonstrated, and then you've secondly written down the outcome of what that meant and what happened in that situation. Where we sometimes get this wrong is we don't do the first step of that. We don't double loop our learning. We don't pause in those moments in a dialogue and go, what's the belief that's servicing that behavior? What am I thinking in my head? So if somebody says something and do something incorrect, how do I think about that? How do I feel about that? What's their thought process on that? If somebody comes onto a webinar and the webinar is really rushed and I don't get a chance to answer questions, and I start to get frustrated and I behave in a frustrated way and we have a bit of a debate on it and it doesn't go quite so well, did I go back to the starting point and consider the belief that person had? Did I think about that they only had a short period of time, so they had to do things in a different way? We need to be better at challenging our beliefs and not challenging our behaviors, about thinking about what our belief system is around some of these things. And in psychology terms, we talk about it as double looping rather than single looping. Is going back to the belief that caused that behavior that then caused that outcome, rather than actually just changing the behavior to expect it to possibly change the outcome. So if we're in difficult, troubled situations in the world and we're trying to shift our outcome, we can't just shift our behavior. We have to hear the other person's belief system. We have to hear our own belief system to try to do things in different ways. And at this point in time, I would probably say to you as well, that you've maybe been in that space of quite a toxic cocktail of kind of adrenaline and cortisol overriding your systems, when you're in that space of finding things quite difficult. And that's when fear really gets a hold of us. That's when our muscles tighten, when our heart rate races, when our hands get colder, when we're really understanding and recognizing how much more and clearer we're perceiving pain. We're probably hearing things a lot clearer, but not necessarily to services in a really good way. So if that happens to you and you get into that lock of fear, or you get into that lock of freezing and trying to fight in those situations, and you start to feel your stress levels and your anxiety levels going up, I'm going to suggest one of 3 things for you that you can have a go at doing. Number 1 is that you can breathe. You can stop for a moment and actually breathe your way through those situations. You can go and practice some meditation, some yoga, some mindfulness, but if you slow your breathing pace down, it'll make an incredible difference to the way in which you do that. Secondly, if breathing's not your thing, because not everyone does. My breathing, by the way, takes place on a bike. That's how I do breathing. I go out on a cycle or I go for a run. That's how I do my breathing. I don't practice yoga, but I practice exercise. So I do the second option. It's up here. I do something physical. I go for a walk and it takes me off that pressure of stress and fear and anxiety. I go and get some fresh air and I go and get some air in my lungs and I go and do some exercise. And in that space of the rhythm of doing that exercise, my brain starts to enter into a different thought process. Or the third thing that I can then do is socialize it. I can go and speak with someone else. If you're stuck in that space of fear and you feel you can't breathe it and you can't walk it, then talk it. Go and chat with someone else. Go and have a conversation with someone else and talk out how you're feeling in that moment. That will help you massively in your responses to mad and to sad situations, because you'll be sharing that with someone else and you'll be having far better conversations with someone else. And that way you can move from that space of languishing, from stopping you in that space of social impairment, to move into that space of flourishing, to help you to be at your best and know what things you could do better. And I found that during lockdown, certainly for me in the early days, was actually having more conversations with people than I've ever had about the real stuff that mattered as well. Last couple of things for me today, then I'm going to hand back over to Lee. I'm going to go past this one, is keep journaling, keep writing stuff down. One of my great friends, Kirsty Mack, who's a brilliant lady from Glasgow, and she uses a beautiful phrase that says, you meet yourself on the paper. And I would encourage you really to write stuff down. If you have a think about how you felt on the 14th of March and you asked me to describe that now, I couldn't tell you. If I'd written it down on the 14th and I'd written down on the 18th, I'd written on the 25th, I know exactly how I felt, and I can track how my mental space has moved forward and what I could have possibly done about that as well. So I really urge you to journal. I mentioned earlier about Sean Ancor's view about this. Write down your 3 positives every single day. Put down the things that you're thankful for, the things that you've appreciated. I've given you so many of them in the call today around doing my daily walks with my son, or focusing on the things that are really good that I'm enjoying in my job role. As I'm looking over the top of this laptop, I can actually see 3 tomato plants in the corner of my office that have started to bloom. That's bringing me an incredible amount of sunshine just looking at them when I'm focusing on the back of the room when I'm doing things. So surround yourself with those positive environmental factors that actually give you a space by which you can flourish in. Last little kind of point on statistics of this is to think about this little visual around the happiness pie. If your genetic set point for happiness is set at 50%, you have to work incredibly hard on those intentional activities. And if you recite and write down your 3 daily high points, if you express gratitude and you savor some of those life pleasures and the things that you can really do, you're giving yourself a far better opportunity to stay in that positive game frame than you are by drifting through those periods of loss. And again, we've all got different genetic set points depending on our upbringing and our social circumstances in terms of where we've been. But if we know that there's a 40% even opportunity for us, then there's lots of things we could do. So just before I hand back over to Lee, I just wanted to share with you a couple of things that I'd urge you to go and look at further. The books on the right-hand side are the items on the right-hand side, because one of those isn't a book. I try to recommend things that I think locally will really sing to you. Gavin Oates is one of the most loveliest human beings and fabulous writers around at the moment. He's done a brilliant book called Life Will See You Now that was published at the beginning of March. And it's right on the money with everything we've spoken about. And Andy Cope's book, Equivalent, is brilliant. The other 2 items are on there. The card system is the thing that I mentioned to you a moment ago. I developed a card set of 52 different cards all around positive psychology. But what I did was I got loads of people to do videos. So I've got 104 different speakers there telling stories around, you know, how they can really power up their learning, or we still won't have by the end of this month when we've got our next round of videos. The other stuff that's on there for you, I've put together a positive playlist for you of songs that you can listen to. I've got a live event I run once a fortnight that's all around kindness and learning that we host it. Again, click on that link when you get the materials through. Kirsty Mack that I mentioned to you there does a retreat online that she's running at the moment as well, called Home, where you can go and really discover your soul at those sessions. It's a fabulous experience over 2 sessions you can do from your own home. Kat Patterson is, again, a Scottish-based designer and creator who does her own bespoke journals. And then lastly, the 3 other examples are websites that you can go and have a little look at where you can expand your learning forward. But thank you very much, everyone, for your time today. I'm going to hand over to Lee before we get cut out in the session and we'll lose everyone. Thank you, Lee. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank you, Scott. I promised we'd stick to there, and Scott's done very well to keep us to that. So all that remains for me to do really is to thank you all for participating today. I wish that we were all in the same room and we could see how we drew the pools, how we wrote our lists and things. Hopefully there'll be other chances to do that at some point, or maybe we deliver the next session in a different way. Most of all, I'd really like to thank Scott for delivering such a thoughtful and an imaginative session today. He's really encouraged me to stop, to reflect, to take stock. Everyone that knows me knows I'm very much a glass half empty type of person. I was part of that 14%. So I've personally learned lots of hints and tips to keep me personally, as well as those around me, to engage in a different way of thinking. We're in tough times and we don't know how long we're going to be in this disruption. So it's really important that we take time to consider everything that Scott has gone through today, and he's given us lots of links that we can go and take away and learn some more, as well as the hints and tips and practical takeaways on the slides. So the slides will be circulated to you. The session has been recorded. If you've got any questions or observations, we don't really have too much time to do that right now, and I'm looking at the chat box and there aren't any there, but please do make contact with us later. So have a lovely afternoon, everybody, and thank you again, Scott.
Pleasure. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Bye now.
Bye.